also would like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference and in giving us an opportunity to reflect back on the past 25 years. Especially in academia, we tend to be stuck behind our ivory towers and always tend to forget as to why what we're doing, what is it that we're doing and why we're doing it. So it was really great to cast the research that I've been working on in terms of the transition paradigm, even a failed transition paradigm, as Arman pointed out. The project I'm working on, actually, I'm really excited about it. It's an edited volume called Lenin's Revenge, Regional Fracture in Post-Communist Eurasia and the Middle East. And the reason I'm excited about this project is because I'm working with a team of really experienced area specialists, and Lawrence Browers has kindly agreed to write the chapter in South Caucasus. But what the book is doing, basically, looking at the cost of missing regional links in various conflict areas in Russia's underbelly, all the way from Donbass to Damascus. So I will talk a little bit about, I will not be going to that project. What I'd like to focus on today is on the way Armenia as a new state is negotiating its neighborhood, whether it cultivates and leverages its regional ties, if at all, how it prioritizes its regional relationships, and how much agency does it have in doing so. And I will piggyback on many of the points that Mr. Ohanyan made yesterday in his statement. Spending nearly a century as part of a big imperial regional bloc, over the past 25 years, Armenia has been pulled into new and often divergent regional pathways. These major geopolitical regional currents often come at the expense of immediate regional ties between small states and their immediate neighbors, which I refer as regional fracturing. We have been talking about Armenia's choices and casting Armenia's choices in terms of East-West, Russia or the EU, Russia or Washington. But in that conversation, what we always forget is that these bigger regional currents often produce deterioration of immediate ties between the countries. So there are costs to these big regional projects that we just need to factor in, whether it's EU or whether it's Russia's Eurasian Economic Union. So I want us to think about Armenia's choices as Brussels or Batumi, really. So these fractured regions, of which South Caucasus is only one, are consequential in changing the contours of world order. Armenian statecraft is unfolding in the context of a fractured region, one among several other ones in Russia's neighborhood, as I mentioned. And looking at Armenia from this perspective, I argue, is essential for recasting and reshaping Armenia's significance as part of American foreign policy. Moving forward, I would like to kind of zoom down and give a more intimate original story. 2 years ago, I was in Dser village in northeast of Armenia, just really enjoying the house museum of Hovhannes Tumanyan, who you probably know is one of the literary giants of Armenian literature. I grew up in Soviet Union reading his works. So the guy just mentioned in passing, one sentence only, that Hovhannes Tumanyan actually was a peace activist of sorts. At the beginning of the 20th century, he played an important part in preventing ethnic violence in South Caucasus. What was really interesting to me at the time is that the Russian Tsar threw him in jail for those activities, and has done it twice. So fast forward 100 years or so, attempting to cross the Kyrgyz-Tajik border with potatoes and apricots to sell. 22-year-old Mansour Ulu was shot dead by border guards, which is reported by David Lewis in the chapter in the book project I'm working on right now. So both of these stories might seem kind of unrelated, but they're part of a single narrative. Deliberate fracture of regional ties between ethnic communities and states, carried out by an external hegemon in the case of Tumanyan, or by the national government in the case of the farmer. Now let's go. I have to learn to navigate this. Oh, there it is. A little bit of social science. Arman already alluded to several theories that try in social sciences that will try to have predictive value. And in social sciences, we haven't been that successful in predicting the future. But one of the theories that in political science and social sciences has been quite effective in shaping policies in particular is this theory of social capital. So the idea is pretty simple in a way that stronger ties and associations between individuals and within communities produce peace and prosperity. So this we'll call as a neighborhood effect. So what I want us to think about is whether there is social capital for states. Does it matter is it important for states, neighboring states, geographically contiguous states to have connections? What are the benefits of that? And does it matter if those links are missing? So there is a lot of scholarship that has demonstrated the benefits of regional integration, economic as well as political. Paul Collier, the author of Bottom Billion, has argued that the global average, actually, worldwide, is that in terms of the neighborhood connections, for every 1% increase of GDP in one country, the neighbor's GDP on average increases about 0.7%. So in advanced European countries, for Switzerland, the indicator would be higher than 0.7%, but in Africa, it would be 0.4%. He also points out the obvious sort of that the neighbors are transport transits and markets, and that landlocked countries benefit from intra-regional as well as extra-regional trade and integration. So regional integration has obvious developmental benefits. Are there costs if these regional ties are missing? 3. So the cost of missing ties are significant. Missing ties tend to fuel armed conflicts, consolidate existing conflict lines. They do undermine diplomatic practices because they essentially lack the sophisticated infrastructure of dense diplomacy between not only political elites, functional ministries, but also the civil society, professional associations, and the farmers, business people, etc. They tend to produce fractured regions, essentially, the ones missing this kinds of regional links. They tend to produce economic protectionism and reward oligarchs. They weaken stakeholders for cooperation and stability, and they do distort trade and development. Borrowing Daron Acemoglu's extractive institutions argument, so it's useful to think of these fractured regions as systems that few select groups, very small number of individuals benefit from ability to function regionally. So as a result, broad-based masses are unable to reap the benefits of regional engagement. So now, okay, if there are so many benefits for regional integration and the costs of not having these regional connections are so high, why is it that some regions are struggling to create this neighborhood effect? Why, in particular, neighborhood effect is missing in post-communist states? There are some examples, actually, several examples from developing countries where regions locked in very complicated conflicts have succeeded in building regional connections, creating regional security arrangements. Mercosur, that reduced tensions between Argentina and Brazil. South African Development Community, that initially was built around regional security issues relative to apartheid in South Africa. South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, etc. So what is the problem in post-communist states, in post-communist space? Lack of democracy has been an argument that has been used. This, I think, I would argue it's a Eurocentric analysis, the assumption being that countries need to democratize first in order to be able to forge pluralistic communities, regional groupings. Conflict trap is another argument that has been used to explain as to why conflict regions, why some regions have failed to come together. The argument being in South Caucasus, I would hear this very often, that regionalism is a fine concept, but it won't work in South Caucasus because there are so many conflicts in the region. Let me actually throw in a slide here. Yes. Existing conflicts prevent regional organization. In the case of South Caucasus, Azerbaijan quite rightfully is singled out for not engaging with Armenia in particular unless the conflict is resolved. Economists in South Caucasus are not complementary, is another argument that I hear. But in general, especially in South Caucasus, regionalism comes close to being viewed as a dirty word. The alternative explanation that I would like to present as to why this neighborhood effect is missing in South Caucasus is that it is a fractured region. And in a way, this might sound tautological, but meaning how can you have missing neighborhood connections are the reason for a fractured region is the reason for missing links. But what I argue is that these fractured regions are much, much broader. They're bigger systems, multi-layered systems. And that actually undermine the prospects of cultivating smaller scale regional connections. So let me spend some time in trying to I did not number my slides, so I have to search for them. Okay, so what are these fractured regions? At their core, it's useful to think of them as divide and conquer policies, essentially. At the brink as such, so they are political systems that are defined by this divide and rule policies in some ways. But at the same time, though, divide and conquer policies practiced by Russia, or many other countries, actually not just by Russia, they tended to be institutionally a lot more simple. States at the beginning of the 20th century in this part of the world, when they just were being formed, they were a lot more malleable. Divide and conquer policies were very easy to deploy. And in such cases, the actor that was deploying such policies had full control, more or less, over these policies. Fractured regions at the beginning of the 20th century do not give such level of control to the actor that is practicing these kinds of policies. So for a variety of reasons, fractured regions as systems, they tend to be represented by various types of actors that tend to push in different directions, east or west. They tend to have states that are internally divided, governments lacking legitimacy, security considerations of states might be pointing in one direction, economic considerations tend to point in different directions, so they tend to have shallow states with poor governance, and the splits between governments and public start having serious geopolitical consequences. Such regions, quite counterintuitively, tend to have a lot of regional organizations. Middle East in particular is quite interesting. I mean, it's a region that has several civil wars going on, but it's also a region that has several regional organizations. As a fractured region, these regional institutions are not capable of delivering region-wide collective goods for their citizens. So institutional proliferation and poor detachment with the societies is one characteristic of this fractured regions. But the biggest distinction between the divide and conquer, pure, simple divide and conquer policies in fractured regions is the issue of agency. The beginning of the 20th century, divide and conquer policies were always assumed to sort of remove agency from the states. If you are too small, don't have much resources, your geographical location is not favorable, etc., you don't have much choices, and it's a discourse that is quite powerful even now for a variety of reasons, justifiable regions. But when you think, what is important in understanding fractured regions is that fracturing is happening by outside actors always, but these regions also have internal participants, meaning that the states are not passive targets of regional fracture. Lawrence actually describes this as entrepreneurs of fracturing, and here it would be useful to mention that. In terms of their political dimensions, I already mentioned they tend to have non-existent or very few multilateral forums and spaces of diplomacy. Functional ministries of states rarely interface. Region-wide contacts between civil society actors are politicized and insignificant in scale. The chase for outside patrons by governments, mainly for regime survival, is quite dominant in shaping how regional fracturing is occurring. Any cooperation that exists tend to be more pronounced in so-called practical, non-security areas. Okay, let's see where I am. Now, implications for implications of fractured regions on global security environment are significant, and it's quite important to reflect on them in light of the transition paradigm. I have 4 minutes, so I'm slowly taking us to a nice landing. Regional fracture as a phenomenon tend to be developed by default as well as by design. So Soviet Union as a regional bloc was notorious for all of the 14 republics, with an exclusion of Russia, being linked to Moscow. So all of the republics were quite dependent on Russia. So whether transport and trade, etc. As a result, even though these republics lived as part of a single regional bloc, their connections with one another were not that strong. So with the collapse of the Soviet Union, lack of these connections made it very difficult for solving some of the conflicts that quickly erupted. So that's an example of a regional fracture by default. And regional fracture by design refers to the external agency that can practice it. And usually post-colonial new imperial powers tend to apply these policies in their former peripheries. I'm sorry, the font is, I realized that I made the font too small. The title of this project was called Lenin's Revenge, simply to reflect on that connection. That South Caucasus inherited Armenia and all of the members in South Caucasus inherited this system. They gained their independence in this system with very poor regional infrastructure of engagement. So regional fracture also differs from pure, simple, sort of divide and conquer policies because it can be a lever as well as a liability for great powers. as colonial legacies, they're often deployed by new imperial powers, but the opposite is also true. Fractured regions can also constrain and challenge these very same new imperial powers, especially those seeking to adjust the world order as they try to get a seat or a better seat at the table. I would like to conclude by simply highlighting that the effects of these fractured regions on low-intensity conflicts are also significant, and I mentioned that already a little bit, but they do make the challenge, the prospects of diplomatic engagement, among several others. Now, actually, let me conclude on a point just simply reflecting on Armenia's current choices, being pulled into a Eurasian Economic Union, which many analysts are critical is in terms of the dependence, over-dependence on Russia's economy that it is going to create. So the uncritical engagement with that particular regional bloc sort of creates the danger of history repeating itself. I will stop here and I'll pass it to Hans. Thank you.
Great, Anna, thank you.